Last week's Race C was a fantastic Group 3 Laguna Seca combo that was absolutely dominated by the BRZ, so naturally I had to take the massive M6 out to see what I could do against it. The M6 is about 18 times the size of the BRZ, but it's definitely no slouch in the corners, so I wasn't really against all odds, but it was definitely still really tough. If you didn't get a chance to try out Race C last week, then you might not know that the BRZ is kind of a double whammy when it comes to being the meta car of the race. When it comes to flat out pace, the BRZ was incredibly dominant. It was extremely fast, faster than any other car by a pretty good margin. And not only that, it is a tire saving race, and that's exactly what the BRZ excels at. Since the BRZ is a definite handling car, the weakness is the power. Now, there aren't exactly a lot of places for more powerful cars to shine, especially considering how much better the BRZ can get out of any corner. You really have to have some pretty good luck and a lot of that slipstream to make use of any of the power. But the one big Achilles heel that the BRZ has is that it's just insanely difficult to drive. Without absolute precision, it's very easy to lose momentum around the corners, and that's, of course, the one really big benefit the car has, carrying that momentum around the corners. So if you mess that up, then, well, you got nothing, and then you can really fall victim to any of the more powerful cars. The much more dangerous aspect of what makes this car incredibly difficult to drive is the fact that when it gets loose, it is very, very difficult to save. If you get loose even a little bit, then chances are you're going to go off in the dirt, or even worse, into a wall. Even more experienced drivers would get caught out by the sudden snap oversteer and the difficulty in catching it. Laguna Seca is a very difficult track, and I think that we don't get it quite enough, so I'd say that a lot of the people that play Gran Turismo 7 don't have enough experience on this track. And the reason that this is important is that there are a lot of incidents. There were a lot of incidents, I should say. I found that when two cars came in contact, usually if one was a BRZ, that one would lose, and luckily I was in a very large BMW. I think if I was in the BRZ and Dr. Marco turned into me like that, I would have been off the track, but luckily, I had some weight behind me. All this talk about the track being difficult and the car being extremely difficult and dangerous, I forgot to mention the crazy sausage curves, and that is exactly why I went so far away from the apex there. I always err on the side of caution, at least at the very beginning, and that caused me to completely miss the apex, but in the end, it's much better to miss the apex by an entire mile than it is to hit that sausage curve. Those things are so incredibly deadly. So if you consider the BRZ, how dangerous it is, how difficult it is to drive it, and then how difficult this track is, and add the sausage curves on top, it really is just an expert level combination. I think one of the reasons that Laguna Seca is really tough, and probably one of the reasons that I really like it, is that there's such a short distance between most of the corners that even if you are much faster than someone you're battling, they can probably stay close enough to try to pull off a move on almost any corner. Now, obviously, I'm always an advocate of picking and choosing your battles, making sure that you don't just slow yourself and your opponents way down by trying to pass every single corner, but not everyone really thinks about it that way. There's a huge number of people who seem to just live for the moment-to-moment action when it comes to sim racing, and I think a lot of people could really care less if they get a win, or I really do mean care less. I don't mean they don't care. I mean they care less about winning than they care about having on-track action. Another thing to consider, especially when you're driving from the back and if you're trying to use the strategy that I'm using, is if you start on the harder, slower compound, inevitably you're going to run into people who are just slower than you who are on the softer, faster compound. Not knowing exactly what I was dealing with here, I just decided to make sure I could give K-Bar as much space as I could. We both stayed on track, and I did come out better in that exchange, but I really got lucky. Not only is it dangerous on the outside, because of course you can accidentally get smashed off into the dirt, but it's dangerous on the inside too, because if they turn in too early, they could actually hit you sideways onto that sausage curve, and of course that's going to be a disaster for both of you. That right there is a moment where we can really thank Gran Turismo's ghosting. I'm not sure if it ghosted him because he was slow or if it detected some kind of connection issue. It did seem like it was netcode because he kind of just teleported backwards. But either way, I was really glad that he didn't just teleport into me and we didn't both just collide. But either way, it was pretty scary, and I did end up losing a position. This is actually a really important moment in the race. You can see that Mike got by him really, really easily, and I'm still having to battle for it. I'm doing everything I can to keep up my speed on the inside without running into Mike, and that gave him the outside to keep up more momentum around the corner, and I wasn't able to pull off any kind of move just yet. Mike had started behind me and is essentially trying to do the exact same thing that I'm doing, so he has a huge advantage here if we're both going for the win. Now, I talked just briefly about the fact that some people are going to be on the faster tire, and we're probably inevitably going to reach them, and I wasn't quite sure yet, but I had a sneaky suspicion that Sir Piccolo was on the faster tire compound. Judging by the lines he was taking and his ability to still maintain so much momentum around the corners, I thought for sure he was definitely on the softer compound, but I didn't quite have proof just yet. On top of my initial suspicions, I had also realized that I didn't actually know Sir Piccolo, and I spent so much time on this game that in general I'm going to know if someone is usually in top split or not, and if they're not in top split, chances are they're not going to be quite as fast as this Sir Piccolo seemed to be going. One of the hardest parts about racing from the back is when you have a situation like this, when you have an inferior tire, but you have more pace than the person you're trying to battle. What happens is it kind of equalizes, but not exactly. You're going to be faster in places where you can't actually utilize your skill, and they're going to be slower in places where you can't actually utilize it either. So what ends up happening is you are just essentially stuck with their pace. Now, a lot had happened on that lap, but if I were racing by myself or with one of the other people in the top split, then we would probably be going in the 22s at this point. If you look on the right side of the screen, you can see that we had just hit a high 24. No matter how much more experience and technique you have than any other driver that you're racing against, it doesn't do anything with the fact that you are physically unable to do the same things that their car can do when they have better tires. I'm realizing that I'm talking a lot about my pace being better than Piccolo, and I don't want to make this sound like I'm hating on Piccolo. In fact, you can see that Piccolo has driven me really cleanly this entire time. As I went for an inside pass, we contacted just a little bit, but we still gave each other space. It didn't actually affect either of us, and so when I got that nice push from Vin Diesel, I was able to get in front, and that was pretty much all of it. Now, unfortunately, he didn't fare as well, and he went off of that on that corner. I don't know if he didn't have enough space or it was just because he got a little flustered with two people passing him, but either way, I actually really appreciated racing against him despite the fact that it was indeed holding me back and slowing me down a little bit. As you can see, just a bit of a sector, less than half of a sector later, I'm already 2/10 faster than we were in the last lap, so that definitely showed that he was indeed holding us back. But this is not hate against Piccolo whatsoever. I'm just more experienced, and I did have more pace, and it just so happened that I caught him on the harder compound. So here's a shout out to Mr. Piccolo. That was good racing, and hopefully we can do it again, and hopefully you won't go off this time. I mentioned earlier in this video that some people are really just going for that corner-to-corner experience of racing people whenever they get the chance, but I, after this many years of sim racing, am always looking for wins. No matter how unlikely it seems, I am always trying to win. When I have Vin Diesel behind me, I know that he can help me through some of the corners, he can push me, we can work together, but I also know that towards the end of the race, he's going to try to take that win. On top of that, our friend Mike Grove is in the meta car, and he's 3 seconds ahead after starting behind us, and I know that he's going for a win as well, so I really had my work cut out for me. Jumping just to the end of that lap, and things start changing dramatically. Not only did Sophia drop back a few places, Jamaican had also spun on the final corner. And so not only did we get that space from Jamaican, we're also now close enough to Sophia to get that slipstream. And even though it's going to be more difficult to make use of that slipstream, we do have custom slip for this race. And that meant that the dirty air was not going to be nearly as strong, and that slipstream was going to be much stronger. Not only does the GTR eat through the tires a little bit more than the M6, something definitely happened to Sophia that probably caused her to slide. And if you slide, even once, you have to consider the multipliers. This race, I believe, had a 9-time tire multiplier. In case you're unaware of Gran Turismo Sport Mode multipliers, they're essentially a way to condense a longer race into a more digestible, shorter race. This race had a 9 times tire multiplier, which meant that at the end of the 6th lap of this race, the tires would feel 54 laps old. This allows for more complex strategies to be used without having to make races that last multiple hours. It requires drivers to adapt much quicker to changing conditions, but one side effect that you may not consider is that every slide is worth 9 slides of damage. Every time you overheat the tires, you've overheated them 9 times, so whatever happened to Sophia did 9 times that damage to the tires. Luckily for her, it was at the end of her stint. She had probably just one more lap to go, but that was definitely going to make it so I could get much, much closer. I considered for just a brief second going into the pits now so I could come out with an undercut on Sophia, and then I could just have free and clean air to chase down the top 3. But I also realized that since none of the top 3 had gone into the pits just yet, I'd be at a huge disadvantage when it came to tire health. We wouldn't be close enough to Mike to try to pull off an undercut. And on top of that, if we did have tires that were a full lap older than his, we'd be at a huge disadvantage considering how good the BRZ is on tires. And on top of that, it was still possible that Chappie and Gregory had the same car. I didn't actually check before the race, or if I did, I didn't remember at this point. So it really would have been really risky for me to try to go for the undercut just to try to pass one person. At this point, it did kind of seem that Sophia was struggling a little bit with the tires. You can see that I actually hit her on exit of T1, and she had pretty slow mid-corner cornering speed right here. But I decided that I was just going to try to work with her as much as I possibly could. We could both go in the pits, and then hopefully after that I'd be able to pull off something really quickly and then try to go for the final 3. Looking in my rear view right now, you can see that we're at the very least going fast enough to keep Vin Diesel and K-Bar off our tails for the time being. The corkscrew is always really scary, especially because there are so many different ways you can take it and so many ways that you can slide out. So right there, I thought I was going to be able to pull all the way in front of Sophia, but she recovered just quick enough to get back in front of me. This did slow all of us down, unfortunately, but like I said before, luckily we were right at the pits and I was going to be able to pull off something as soon as we got to the other side of the pits. If you've watched enough sport mode, or if you play it yourself, then you're probably aware that there are lots of really strange quirks and lots of things to learn about it that may or may not actually be fair, such as all of the quirks of the penalty system. But one of the weirdest things is the fact that the pit stops are supposed to be identical, but sometimes they're not. I've tried to figure this out myself, and I've also asked many people what they think might be happening, but I think the most common idea of what could be happening in situations like this is differing in the car's gearing makes them come out of the pits at different speeds. The pit stops are all going to be identical, but some cars actually just come straight out of the pits faster than others. As you can see, we're all the way ahead of Sophia, or we're actually in the exact same space. Since we're all ghosted coming out, we might actually be in the exact same space. And besides that, Vin Diesel was also right behind us. And as you can see right there, we both had a huge advantage when it came to the gearing, even after coming out of the pits. Despite the fact that Sophia was in front and Vin Diesel was right behind me, both of us ended up all the way in front of Sophia as soon as we got out of the pits. That is obviously absolutely not fair, but of course I'm going to take it and I'm going to run with it. In the past, before someone had introduced the concept of the fact that it might be gearing, I had thought that it was who had the most momentum coming out of the last corner or going into the pits, but I really don't think that's actually it. I do think it has to do with the gearing. If you look at the top left, you can see that Chappie and K-Bar had both waited until this lap to go into the pits. K-Bar was multiple positions behind, and I had a really good outlap, so I knew I didn't have to worry about him. And Chappie was on the medium switching to hard, so I was going to be on a much better tire compound, and so even if I did catch him, I should be able to get in front of him without any kind of issues. That left just Gregory and Mike to have to deal with, and as you can see right there, Gregory had unfortunately gone off, and that was an easy freebie. I wasn't quite sure exactly where Chappie was going to come out, and even though Vin Diesel was really close, I knew that he was going to work with me at least until the end, or I started driving really poorly. So if anything, if he got too close, he would start bump drafting me until the very end, and then we could battle it out. So I wasn't really worried about my overall pace when it came to trying to catch the two in front. Coming out of T1 and T2, we could see that Chappie was still in view, and Mike, even though he was almost out of view, was still just barely there. You could see him just disappearing around that one corner right there. I hadn't realized it yet, but my lap was purple. And so that was a really good sign that maybe I was going to be able to pull something off. Jumping to the end of that lap, you can see we're now only 1 second behind Chappie, but unfortunately that lap was a full half second slower than the lap that Mike just did, and he is all the way out in front with absolutely no one to worry about. This was actually the very first time that I'd driven this car in the race, so I was still getting used to it, and these are the first laps that I've been able to do on the soft tires. Well, softer tires, they're the medium tires. So I was very happy again to see that I was once again purple. It's important to temper your expectations too, because Mike could have been purple by twice as much as I was purple, and I still had to deal with Chappie as well. I talk about this a lot in my guides, but I feel like we should talk about it right now. It's really important to know the strengths and the weaknesses of the cars that you're racing, so you can kind of set up passes. The Porsche is very quick around corners, but it's also difficult to drive, and it lacks top speed. So when I had better tires on this car than the Porsche did, and we're going up that big hill, it was pretty much going to be really easy as long as I got a run to pull off a pass on him. And I was really lucky that not only did it not slow us down, it probably actually gave us a big boost because we had a little bit of slipstream. It was at this point we could see the nearly impossible task that we had set out in front of us. Mike was now nearly 7 seconds ahead with only 4 laps to go. As I took the final corner of that lap, I realized it was going to be the very first corner that I take when I don't have to worry about anyone in front or behind except the one man that I was chasing down. The good news is I was very consistent and I was only 0.03 of a second off of my last lap, which was my fastest. The bad news was Mike was going 0.9 per lap faster. Jumping to the end of that lap, unfortunately, I still hadn't quite figured out how to drive this car. Other cars in this situation, I'd be going very low 21s, and Mike was still going very fast, except for the fact that something had happened, and he was now only 2.2 seconds ahead instead of 7 seconds ahead, which he was on the last lap at this exact same point. And you can see right there, he took a little bit more dirt, but it didn't quite slow him down, did it? One more lap ahead, I'm going even slower, in fact by a huge amount, but somehow we managed to close in even more on Mike, and he was only 1.6 seconds ahead at this point. Into the final lap, it's very clear that I was not going to improve my time. I had shredded my tires, and I did not quite figure out how to drive this car fast at all. In subsequent races, I was able to get down to a 121.2 in this car, but you could definitely hit 20s in this car if you put together a really good lap. Just as I was settling into the inevitability of taking home second place, our friend Mike almost lost it. Now, that save right there would be difficult to pull off in even a normal car, but the fact that he pulled that off in the BRZ is actually massively difficult. So huge kudos to Mike. That was a crazy save. That was very well done. It all couldn't have happened at a more perfect moment. Not only did I not give up the fight, but it also put us in a situation that really mirrored what happened with Chappie. And we've been thinking about the volatility of that car for the entirety of the race. Mike made just a slight mistake at the wrong time after his previous mistake, and because of the power of this car, I was able to get all the way in front before the corkscrew, and now all I had to do was defend a couple more corners. The corners in question, unfortunately, are the worst corners for this car and the best corners for the BRZ, so I knew that I really had to do everything I could to keep up my pace and make sure I didn't just give Mike the position back. With a half-second difference and knowing that it's Mike, I knew he wasn't going to do anything crazy, so I was safe to just take the normal racing line, and as long as I didn't slide out, I was fine. And that right there is how I somehow took the boat of an M6 all the way from the back and beat everyone else on this track. One could argue that this race could be chalked up to luck, but in reality, pretty much every race win could be chalked up at least a little bit to luck. Every single race, every single competition, anything that you can do that requires any kind of skill and talent is going to boil down to at least some level of luck. And luckily for me, I had a lot of it this day. Thank you so much for watching my video. I'm going to end it here, and of course, I'm going to be trying to make one of these every single week on top of my anti-meta guides. I asked last time, but if you think this is something that I should continue doing, please let me know. I do plan on making more of this series, but I have a lot of other ideas that may or may not be better. They might even be worse. Please let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, and what your favorite cereal is. And of course, I'm going to leave you with a look at my current members. I love every single one of you. Thank you so much for believing in me and supporting me in this way. Have a good night.